Turning to page 32 of today's printed calendar, House Bill 565, a bill to amend various sections of the Code of Virginia relating to public charter schools. Report for the Committee on Education with a substitute.
Gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelter.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Substitutes agreed to. Gentleman from Prince William.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, House Bill 565 makes several changes in the provisions for the establishment and operation of charter schools in Virginia. Let me highlight a few points and then try to move this on. I know we've been here a long time. We've heard a lot of debates, so I don't want to trespass on the House's time. Here are some key points. Between lines 79 and 99, you'll see that it consolidates and clarifies provisions related to the applicability of state and federal laws and regulations. That's things like FOIA, non-discrimination, student accountability, and assessment requirements, and so forth. From lines 161 to 256 of the substitute provides more details in terms of what must be in a charter application and lists 32 items that the application must contain. That's important because under the current law, it's not that clear, and it makes it difficult on localities to understand what is in the application. If you go to lines 100 to 160, this addresses the charter contract. Again, in the current statute, this is sort of muddled, and so we've provided some very good framework here, including detailed performance points and targets. In lines 318 through 346, this makes clear that the State Board of Education may make specific findings to grant applications previously denied by a local school board, but only up to 5 per year. So there's a sort of a glide path here. We're not going to fling open the doors, as it were. Additionally, in lines 344 through 46, this provides that provisions related to the board review, the higher education review, only go into effect in 2017 if the November 2016 resolution passes, sponsored by the gentleman from Albemarle. Mr. Speaker, let me make some quick points here and then we'll move on. You recall, Mr. Speaker, in 2005, you came to my office and you asked me to really dig in on this charter school reform business. And I took that charge seriously. And over the years, we have attempted to make our charter school law in Virginia one that works. But our efforts, frankly, Mr. Speaker, have done precious little to advance charter schools. The opposition has ensured that the charter law is both Byzantine and an impediment to growing charter schools in Virginia. In the first 5 years of when the charter school law was authorized, school boards that were enrolling almost half of Virginia's students voted on resolutions saying, we'll never do charter schools. 5 years in, and the gates went up. The rest of the nation, in the meantime, has moved ahead of Virginia. 18 years later, we have 9 charter schools in Virginia. And you heard what the gentleman from Albemarle said about our neighboring states. They're speeding ahead of us. The evidence, contrary to what the opposition says, is telling us that charters work and people are lined up to partake in them. Here are a few points. Charter schools provide more educational time and one-on-one time than other public schools do. Charter schools are some of the nation's most successful public schools, and that's an important point. They are public schools. U.S. News and World Report has ranked the number 2 and the number 4 top high schools in the country, and they were charters. Public charter schools are helping to close the achievement gap, helping children in minority and underserved communities to succeed. On average, nationwide, charter schools serve more minorities and more students eligible for free and reduced lunch than other public schools. Remarkable. Remarkable. Graduation rates at charter schools are higher than are in public schools, and students are 11% more likely to graduate. Students from charter schools are accepted into college at higher rates than in public schools, and students are, again, 11% more likely to attend college. The opposition will tell you that we don't trust localities to make these decisions, but this is a false argument. It's not about trust, it's about a clear vision. And we know that charters work. Our critics will sometimes, Mr. Speaker, point to a 2009 study from the Center of Research on Education Outcomes at Stanford University. However, every study by this same institution since shows that, as a whole, charters perform much better. A 2015 study by the same institution examined charters in 41 urban areas in 22 states over a 5-year period and found charters collectively provide, quote, significantly higher levels of annual growth in both math and reading compared to their traditional public school peers, unquote. Parents want school choice, Mr. Speaker. They see the need clearly, even if politicians don't. And all of us, I believe, will see very clearly in November that Virginians want this. Let me conclude, Mr. Speaker, with this point. This is from an editorial recently written on the 9th of February. And this is what it says. Now, these same monopoly protectors, and we're talking about the institutions which oppose charter schools, are leading the fight against a modest reform, we're talking about reform here in Virginia, of law being considered by the General Assembly. Virginia lawmakers should put the long-term interest of students, particularly children at risk, over the self-interest of the education establishment. And it concludes with this, Mr. Speaker. Research and experience have documented the success of highly qualified charters, notably in helping low-income students achieve. States that have put in place muscular, authorizing systems with proper oversight have produced the most effective charter schools, and not the tunnel vision of school districts wanting to protect their turf should guide the decision-making of lawmakers in Virginia. You know who wrote that? The Washington Post, that big conservative newspaper in Northern Virginia. Mr. Speaker, we have to remember that reform frequently comes from without, not from within. You only have to look at the institution I dearly love, the U.S. Army, to see that. It took Harry Truman, someone from without that institution, to deal with segregation, and the Army was better for his leadership. The Army changed its complete instructional methods in the 1970s to tasks, conditions, and standards. You know what we did there? The outside influence was, oddly enough, the education community that told us we can train better. Reform came from without. Unfortunately, we have not seen that reform in Virginia. So let me conclude with this. This reform will lead to responsible and needed growth in charter schools in Virginia, but more importantly, in many cases, kids will have a better opportunity to benefit from the improved educational setting that will demonstrably and clearly indicate that charters will work if they are given a chance. Mr. Speaker, Public schools have nothing to fear from healthy competition, and they have all to learn from it. I move we engross the bill and pass it to a third reading.
The clerk will report a floor amendment.
A floor amendment has been submitted to the committee substitute by Delegate Albo. One amendment on line 321. On line 321, after such application, strike and three little i's and insert three little i's. The Commonwealth or the public charter school applicant will pay for the construction of such public charter school, and little 4, it continues.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Albo. I recognize the gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Albo. Does the gentleman have a parliamentary inquiry? Or?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the Speaker whether the amendment is germane, given the fact that the substitute we have adopted has removed all portions related to funding, and I believe the gentleman's amendment deals with funding.
Well, let's take a look at it. Yeah. The gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis, questioned whether or not the floor amendment offered by the gentleman from Fairfax was germane to the substitute. And if you look in the substitute on lines 252, 253, there's language in the substitute about funding the school, how the budget, what the budget is going to be, how it's going to be. And basically what the gentleman from Fairfax's inartfully drawn amendment says is that the decision of who's going to pay for the school, whether it be the Commonwealth or the charter group, needs to be one of the ingredients of this study. So I'm going to rule this germane. Questions on adoption.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Fairfax.
May I speak to my amendment, please?
Oh, you already had. Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I love charter schools. In fact, we have arguably the best charter school in all of the country in Fairfax County, Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. My problem with this whole concept is who's going to pay for it. I have spent 5 years working with a number of elected leaders in Northern Virginia to get the money to renovate my high school, and the gentlelady from Alexandria's high school, also West Springfield High School. They didn't. It cost $70 million to renovate a school. The thing's 50 years old. It looks exactly the same as when I was there, and they didn't have the money. And it took us 5 years to get up to the queue, and finally in the fall, we're going to be able to get it renovated. The problem I have with the concept of this charter school is not that I don't like charter schools, but I want to know who's going to pay for it. What this talks about here on line 318 is the system and the way the bill is implemented. So a local school board first gets the application. If they say no, they can essentially appeal to the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education has to make some findings. All I want them to do is make the finding that either the Commonwealth or the public charter school itself is going to pay for construction. I'm not asking a whole lot. I didn't say operation, right? Because what happens is the state money goes to the county and it follows the kid. So the kid goes from a public school, goes to a charter school, that money will follow the kid. The problem is the construction. And if you had the state say, Fairfax County citizens, we want you to have a new high school, then you're asking Fairfax County citizens to pay $70 to $90 million for a school they don't even want. So I don't really think that this is much to ask, and all we're asking is that when the Commonwealth Board of Education approves a school, they approve it by having the funding either paid by the state or paid by the public charter applicant. I hope it'll be a pleasure to the House to adopt the floor amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
The
Speaker.
delegate from Loudoun, Mr. Greason, speaking to the floor amendment.
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I apologize. Could the clerk record the floor amendment again? It went quickly and then I lost track of it. Would that be okay, Mr. Speaker?
Clerk will repeat the floor amendment.
Floor amendment offered by Delegate Albo to the committee substitute on line 321, after the word such application, strike and, then after the three little I, insert the Commonwealth or the public charter school applicant will pay for the construction of such public charter school, and little 4 picks up what's existing text.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman rise for a question regarding the floor amendment? Gentleman from Fairfax.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, as he wrote the floor amendment, I totally understand what he's getting at, but a lot of the charter schools will be in existing buildings or in other buildings, and he's only talking about the construction of a building. I would ask the gentleman if that is his primary concern, because it could be a lot of money to just renovate an old space and or occupy an existing building, and the floor amendment is very narrowly drawn to just construction. I'd ask the gentleman if he could articulate his opinion on renovation or occupation of another building.
Tell the gentleman I probably, if I had more time, would have put renovation in there also. I mean, I thought this was going to be in the bill. From what I heard, I thought this kind of concept was going to be in the implementation bill. But when I got here today and I read it, I didn't see it. So it might not be all-encompassing, but it gets it in the paper so that when this bill moves forward, people can maybe change construction and expand it if needed.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman yield for an additional question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman if he might be okay that we would look at a broader floor amendment, because, Mr. Speaker, I think the gentleman's floor amendment as it stands right now will cause almost all charter schools to fail at the state level, since the state is automatically saying that they either have to pay for it, or if the entity creating the charter school isn't willing to pay for it, the state would have to pay for it. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to vote against this, but I'd ask the gentleman if he would consider withdrawing his floor amendment and then addressing it in a different fashion.
Mr. Speaker, I will be happy to agree to let the bill go by today for the day, and we can find a better way to write what we want, but I don't want to withdraw my amendment.
I thank the gentleman.
Mr. Speaker.
Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Would the gentleman from Fairfax resume the floor for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Yields.
Mr. Speaker, the gentleman's amendment, as you described, was inartfully drawn. Is it possible under this amendment, since you talk about the construction either must be paid for by the state or the petitioner, could a charter school applicant use an existing building, because it seems to be precluded that the only option they have is to construct a building by themselves or for the state to construct a building? It seems to exclude the possibility that maybe they have a church that they can use or some other public, some other building that they can use for a school that they don't have to construct.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think my amendment precludes that. If there's no construction needed, the amendment, the finding you wouldn't have to make that finding. If the public charter is going to provide and pay for the building, then they have paid for the construction and would meet this criteria.
Further question?
The gentleman yield.
I yield.
The gentleman yields.
I don't have the amendment in front of me. I had to listen. It seems that by not allowing a petitioner to use an existing building which they've leased or purchased under other circumstances, the only option the gentleman's amendment is allowing is that a building must be constructed either by state money or by the petitioner.
The answer to the gentleman, I don't think that's what it says. The amendment says the Commonwealth or the public charter school applicant will pay for the construction of such public charter school. If there's no construction, then they don't have to pay for it.
Mr. Speaker, one more question.
Gentleman yield.
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
It seems that the only option the gentleman is allowing is not that either they may use an existing building which they have renovated or which would pass building code. You don't say that. You only provide for construction of a school either by the state or by the petitioner. So it seems to exclude the use of an existing building, and I would hope the gentleman would address it if he...
I answer the gentleman is I don't agree with your interpretation of my amendment. My amendment says if there's construction, the state or the public charter school has to pay for it. If there's no construction, then the criteria is automatically met because the point's moot. You don't have to talk about construction since it doesn't exist.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address it very briefly.
Yeah, I got some other people I need to. The gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan, speaking to the floor amendment.
Yes.
The gentlewoman has floor.
I will speak to the bill later, hopefully. But, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I hope you will adopt this floor amendment. The City of Richmond actually has approved 2 charter schools, and one of them it approved conditionally. And the condition was that that school, which did not have a facility, the condition was that they provide their plan for a facility. In that case, they either would have had to construct it or go find a new building. But their original application, they didn't have anything. And without the gentleman from Fairfax's amendment, it is possible that the state could override the locality, have a charter school go in place with no plan for the building it's going to be in, and then the locality will have to be on the hook to build it. And with the gentleman's commitment, which I believe I heard him make, that he would continue to work on making sure that a renovated building, because that was also an issue with the second charter school approved by the City of Richmond, we absolutely need to avoid any situation where a locality is trying to do the right thing and make sure this charter school does not put them on the hook to build or renovate a school that they don't have the funds to do in order for that school to succeed. So I hope you will adopt the amendment.
The gentleman from Albemarle, Mr. Bell.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, I think that we are kind of not accurately describing these schools. These are public schools, and the reason that matters would be if the locality is working with the charter schools, if they are willing to be a cooperative partner in this, you are taking kids from the school that has the kid and putting them into another public school. And I'll give you the example of one of the very few schools that has been approved and worked its way through the labyrinth is the Albemarle public charter. They were in the basement of the existing public school because the public school system recognized that if you take 50 of their neediest and hardest to work with kids, you're taking them out of one place and putting them into another place. Now, if you are in an expanding school district, if more students are coming in every year like Loudoun County, you are saving the school district from building. If you are in a school district that is staying steady or shrinking, like other parts of the state, you are again providing a service and they have the buildings already. In either case, this is just a different way for public schools to provide public education to public school students. I hope that we will reject the gentleman's amendment and allow this bill to go forward. Thank you.
The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Mr. Speaker, I would be more comfortable if this amendment indicated that a petitioner charter school could use an existing building. But this, again, by not addressing and not granting authority to do that, the silence seems to me to argue that there is no authority to use an existing building.
The question is on the adoption of the floor amendment offered by the gentleman, the gentleman from Prince William, Ms. Lingenfelder.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to floor amendment.
The gentleman has the floor.
In reading the floor amendment, I'm not sure it actually is constructed properly, but we'll leave that aside for a second. If you wanted to propose an amendment that is the very example of what we have been dealing with since 2005, this is it. This is exactly it. We have seen step after step after step to try to take charters off the table. And so I'm not surprised the gentlewoman from Richmond is supportive of the amendment. I'm not sure she'd vote for the underlying bill. But I have to tell you, this is what we've seen. So I would ask you respectfully to reject the amendment. Let this bill go forward. And if the gentleman still has concerns, I'm happy to work with him. We still have a way to go. But I do not believe this amendment is at all helpful, and I would ask you to defeat it.
Questions on adoption of the floor amendment offered by the gentleman from Fairfax. Delegate Asano, did you want to speak? Okay. Questions on adoption of the floor amendment. As many as favor adoption of the floor amendment will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Are enough up. Shall the floor amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 66, noes 28.
Ayes 66, noes 28. The amendment is agreed to. The question before us is the engrossment past third reading. Gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking briefly to the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, just in my mind, what this bill is. This bill is not about do we want charter schools or not. That's HB 3. That's going to maybe pass next week. It'll go to the voters. Who knows what the voters do. This bill is if HB 3 passes and the voters pass it, should the BOE be allowed to proliferate charter schools across the state, or should there be some restrictions around it? And that's what this bill does. This bill says if the BOE has the ability to put charter schools in there, they can only do 5 a year. They have to give preference to those areas that are underserved. They can't go out and proliferate these things in one area. It's just one per district max. And it provides those restrictions. And for me, being from Virginia Beach, where we have a great charter school, we have a great academy, we don't need these restrictions. This is what provides my district protection, but allows those that are underserved, that really fall through the cracks, or on the rest of the Commonwealth of Virginia, to get the opportunity they deserve for their future. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentleman from Richmond City, the gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. this is not a speech against charter schools. If it was, I would have spoken against House Bill 3. This is a speech that if we are going to do charter schools, we have to get it right. Since Reconstruction, we have operated under the policy that local school divisions, localities, would primarily have control over education in this Commonwealth. The only time we have strayed from that was during massive resistance, when the General Assembly, under the Gray Plan, which was also adopted in a referendum as a constitutional amendment, put a law in place to automatically close any local school that the local school board decided to integrate. Arlington County overwhelmingly voted against the Gray Amendment. And when the Arlington local school board was going to integrate their schools, the General Assembly abolished the school board and appointed their own, who then closed the schools altogether. That is why there are a large number of people who do not believe it is a good idea to take control away from the locality on deciding whether and how to implement a charter school. Now, the gentleman from Prince William gave you some studies. There was an equally, if not large, body of studies that show that on average, across the country, charter schools have not improved academic performance. And I would note the charter school here in the city of Richmond failed to be accredited this year. So they're not improving outcomes for their students. This body of research has also shown that what charter schools have done is there's a significant risk, and in many areas that risk has borne out, of increased segregation on the basis of race and ethnicity, income, and special education. These studies have shown a strong link between school choice programs and an increase in segregation, that the risk of segregation is a direct reflection of the design of the school choice program. Not choice in and of itself, but how it was implemented. Now, that is not to say that the proponents of charter schools intend segregation. They don't. They don't. But one such study said it takes a lot of care through targeted funding and oversight to mitigate the pressures that lead to yet more segregation. It is important, whatever the motivation, that government does not exacerbate the problem of segregation by ignoring the unintended consequences of its policies. Otherwise, you risk an even further divided public education system. Now, again, Richmond twice has voted to have a charter school. And both times, once unconditionally, once with a condition. And both times they looked at the merits of the charter. They wanted to have it. They wanted to have charter schools, the school board. But the organizations that brought those applications forward did not have their act together. The first one insisted on being in a building that the school board closed because it did not meet all of the federal requirements under ADA. It needed massive renovations, and Richmond didn't have the money to do it. And for the first few years of getting that charter school up and running, the biggest fight was over who's going to pay to renovate the Patrick Henry building that the applicants insisted their school go into. The second school, as you heard me say, the condition was you have to show us that you have a facility, you have a plan to pay for it, you have a plan for transportation for your students, you have a plan for special education students and English language learners. If you do that, you can open your school. They never did it. Now, under this bill, particularly the lines we just amended, which does alleviate some of the problem, but doesn't completely fix it. Under this bill, if a local school board has denied an application for whatever reason, a state unelected board can bypass the will of the elected local officials if the standards of a nationally recognized organization are met, if by some vague measure the local community supports it, doesn't say you have to have a referendum, just support, and a subjective view if the greater weight of the evidence is in support of the application. Now, I don't know what that means. There is a reason why, if we don't get this right, we will make problems in our existing public schools, in our school systems, worse. The proponents of charter schools always talk about, this is about competition. Competition is good. A little competition will do the schools good. 2 points. Competition works in a completely free market. We don't have a free market in education when the Commonwealth of Virginia places its thumb on the scale and hampers all the other public schools because we don't give them the resources they need to meet all of the needs of their students. We tie their hands way more than we tie the charter schools. Charter schools can pick who they take. Other public schools can't. And education is not a commodity. Our Constitution has promised every child in Virginia a free, high-quality public education. Our number one priority should be to look at, if we have local school divisions and local public schools that aren't meeting up to that promise, let's get in that school and fix it. Not take some of those students who are lucky enough to win a lottery to go into a charter school. Ms. Speaker, again, the voters may very well decide that they want charter schools. But this bill is putting the cart before the horse and is going to implement those charter schools in a way that are not going to address the needs of all of our children, but could very well do what has happened in New York and Louisiana and some other states and make our school divisions even more segregated than they already are today. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, I just want to correct a few things or impressions I believe the gentlelady from Richmond has given the House. This is not about segregation. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the lady is close to have crossed the line from the standpoint of what this Education Committee dealt with and how we've approached this legislation. This is a revision to our current statutes related to charter schools. What we are attempting to try to do is to provide some additional opportunity for children. We have tried to approach public education issues and education issues in a bipartisan manner. But this is not about segregation. This is not about an attempt to specify which students or other students can or can't. We want all students to succeed, and we want them to be able to have access to charter schools. The fact is, we only have 9 in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The District of Columbia has 30-some charter schools. If this was about segregation or race, what is going on in the District of Columbia or other states that have charter public schools? The other thing about this is, from my perspective, we've lost what the purpose of what public school choice is about. It's to try to help children. And yes, maybe Richmond's, one of their charter schools is struggling, but the fact is many of Richmond's schools are struggling. Many of Petersburg's schools are struggling. Many schools in rural areas are struggling. In fact, in Stanton, there are schools that are struggling. In Waynesboro, in the areas that I have represented or in the regions that I represent, there are schools that are struggling. The purpose of this bill and the resolution to try to have the referendum is to allow some choice so parents and students have access to try to solve some of the problems for those schools that are challenged and having problems. Charter schools will not be the panacea, will not be the end-all and be-all, but it is a choice. And that is what we're trying to provide with this legislation. So I wish that we would not take this argument to whether certain students or other students can or cannot access. The purpose is for every student to be able to access based on how the charter is adopted and set up. And that's why it's called a charter, because it's a contract between the parents, the public schools, and more importantly, providing opportunity for students. So I hope you'll pass the bill.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Morris.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentlelady from Richmond rise for a question?
Will the gentlewoman yield?
I yield.
Gentlewoman yields.
Mr. Speaker, the lady made several references to segregation and race. And segregation is a state activity to force separation. So my question for the gentlelady, is it her allegation that the purpose of these charter schools is a state activity to force separation of the races?
No, Mr. Speaker. I would answer the gentleman if he was listening carefully. What I said was, I did not believe that the proponents of charter schools intended to segregate our schools on any basis. But there is de facto segregation and there is segregation by law. And my point is, and the studies have shown this, that the impact of charter schools in some of the states that have adopted them has been to exacerbate segregation of schools on the basis of race and ethnicity, income, and special education. And my concern is if we do not get this right, we could have the same problem here. Again, I am not saying that anybody in this room, in this building, wants to segregate schools. But we have an obligation to make sure when we adopt public policy, we do it in a way that de facto won't.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is on the engrossment passage third reading. As many as favor the motion to engross and pass the third reading, House Bill 565, will please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Chair is in doubt. As many as favor the motion will raise their right hand. Those opposed, same sign. Yeah, bills engrossed and passed to the third reading.